We are living in an age of unprecedented innovation. We are living in an age in which everything we presume, that we learned, that we believed, may be about to change. And I know all of you know that. This time is like a river of innovation, which is broader, deeper, and faster flowing than anything humankind has seen before. The problem is that for many of us, it isn't just a time of excitement. It's not just a time in which we're excited to see the world changing. The reality is that for many of us and for many of you, this is a time of great uncertainty and complexity and even fear. And the reason for that is you came to this river on the wrong bank. The bank you approached this river from was the industrial era bank, and it ends in a steep cliff to this river. And you can look across that river and you can see that other companies that began on the other side are benefiting from these disruptive innovations like no companies have ever benefited. They're becoming the most valuable companies in the world. And you want to be there too. But you've got to take 10,000, 100,000, even 1 million people with you across that river. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk about the bridge that you as leaders of your companies will have to build. I'm going to talk about that bridge that you can take 10,000 people across. And I'm going to paint a picture of what it would be like if you were on the other side of this river. So that's how I'm going to focus. I'm really going to focus on the how. Now, in order to do that, I will briefly talk about two other things. I will talk a little bit about this notion that I call the fifth era and why we've given it a different name. And I will talk about the greatest value creation and loss that this time is creating. But I'm going to do that very briefly because I know that you know those things. And what I'm going to spend most of my time is how can your companies prosper? How can you build this bridge? And what would success look like if you cross this river? So just going right back to the beginning. Human beings, all of us, lived in the past in different ways. For most of humankind's existence, we lived in small communities off the land as hunter-gatherers and foragers. Wealth wasn't accumulated, technologies were basic, and that is most of human existence. And then some disruptive innovations came: domestication of animals, new crops, irrigation, and we moved into the agrarian period. Wealth shifted, and the people that became fabulously wealthy were the landowners, the people that could secure the land that other people worked. And then change happened again, and in the 14 or thereabouts hundreds, new technologies of long-distance navigation, new instruments, global markets, ways to manage risk and lending surfaced, and we entered the mercantile period. And in the mercantile period, wealth shifted again. And the people that gathered in that wealth were the first merchants. The Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, around the Mediterranean, the trading nations. It was no longer the landowners, it was the new people who gathered in the means of production and the means of wealth creation. And then steam, the spinning jenny, the mule, and we moved again, carbon fuels, the industrial era. And in the industrial era, wealth again shifted. Industrial tycoons, the financiers that backed them with new models of public markets, captured the wealth. And some of your companies were created in this time frame, I know. What have we learned? Throughout human existence, disruptive innovations spell the time of transition when everything that used to be important may no longer be important. And we've learned that new value creations surface, but it does not automatically accumulate to the prior winners. There is nothing that says that just because you were successful in the past, you will be successful in the future. And so, of course, we have to use new approaches. We have to get to the other side of that river as quickly as we can, because the side we're on does not automatically mean success. So, what's driving this? I'm not going to go into this in any detail because many others have in the last 2 days, but it's both the twin revolutions, not just the digital revolution, and I know that here we're about digitization, but it's the digital revolution and the biotech revolution occurring at the same time. But the digital revolution, we societally, through regulatory policy, chose to allow to move very fast. We did not regulate the internet in the first 20 to 30 years of existence. We chose not to do it, and it moved and accelerated extremely quickly. The biotech revolution, we've chosen to slow down. We don't allow scientists and commercial entities to do everything they could do, because we could change human beings and everything we are, and we don't know whether we want to. So there's so much more, as also these things are compounding. So the digital revolution has been fueling the biotech revolution, big data, artificial intelligence, rapid collaboration between scientists around the world, et cetera, et cetera. The biotech revolution has not yet dramatically impacted the digital revolution, though many of us believe that's coming too. The organic computer is one example, but also things like bioengineered fabrics or textiles or new materials, et cetera, grown in tanks rather than industrially produced. So this is the guts of it, but now we see all these other innovations. The leading venture capitalists and angel investors of America vote these as the top 6, but it doesn't matter which list. Artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, cyber, artificial intelligence, VR, fintech, blockchain, clean tech. It doesn't matter. What matters is that there's more changing than ever before, and everything we are doing is shifting too. And in fact, the theoretical underpinnings of why we do what we do today may be getting challenged. The corporate model of the industrial era, the public financial market model that we're used to, and as I'll talk about later, all of the things we were taught about strategy and leading companies may actually no longer apply. And that's why we call it the fifth era. I'll return to this later. One of the most, and I love this picture, by the way, one of the most important points I want to leave with you today is that as you lead your companies, you have to plant the seed. And the best seed to plant right now is we're entering something new. Not that we're continuing the past in a fourth industrial revolution, but rather that this is new. And in California and in the companies we're going to talk about empirically, they have crossed that bridge, and they do believe they're on a different bank. The world is changing. Innovation is the centerpiece of this new world. And again, I will talk about this later too. It's the greatest value creation opportunity the world has ever seen. It's not very complicated, right? The population at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution was 4 billion. Now it's 8 billion and growing. GDP per capita has never been larger. Markets have never been globally connected in the way that they were. So it shouldn't surprise us that when you multiply all of those things, the profit pools that are up for grabs are larger than they've ever been. And so it doesn't come as any surprise that the 5 most valuable companies in the world are Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. And it's not just because they're massively profitable. Investors believe that they will capture a disproportionate share of the future growth and profits of the world. They may or may not. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is shifting very fast. Now, I did do some work over the last few years. We looked at every large American public company that had seen a dramatic loss in its economic value. And then we went back and we looked at the events that drove to those economic value declines, and we categorized them. And it turns out that it isn't exogenous variables, changes in raw supplies and commodity prices. It isn't so much to do with operational issues and operational failures or even compliance issues, though there are failures of that type, Tyco or Enron, etc. No, 81% of the time where the companies that lost value fastest lost it, it was because they were on the wrong side of strategic and innovation shifts in their own industry and marketplace. And I put this in not to make anyone afraid, but it is the other half. To capture value, someone has to lose it. And the losers are losing it because they're on the wrong side of everything we've been hearing about in the last 2 days. I won't talk about this in the interest of time, but now let me talk about the how. And I know that's really what you want me to talk about. So just as background, my wife, who is my co-author, and I started with McKinsey. We're very proud to be A.T. Kearney partners. Went to California 30 years ago, ran the West Coast for A.T. Kearney for 7 or 8 years. We then became senior executives. She was CFO BlackRock, which is the world's largest investment entity. I was CFO and then head of strategy and then marketing for Gap. And then I ran Monitor Group on the West Coast and Booz. The point is, we were lucky. We were in the right place to watch this thing begin. And my clients were Google. I'm still a special advisor on corporate strategy and policy on and off at Google. I've served Microsoft on and off for 25 years on strategy, and worked also with Amazon and Facebook. So it's just been lucky. We also are the most active investors in America, back more companies than anyone else. And so we've watched the entrepreneurs and the investors and what they're doing. And what I'm now going to share with you, and what is in our book, but what I'm sharing with you is simply the empirical evidence of what do these companies do when they get to the other bank. If they weren't born on it, as some of them were, obviously, Google, Amazon, and Facebook were born on that other bank. But actually, Apple and Microsoft weren't. They were born in the world of mainframe legacy computing and infrastructure, and they've had to run very fast to get to the other side. So let's talk about what are they doing empirically. And I will let you know up front that I do believe that this is a very different model to corporate innovation. And whilst I know as I share this with you, many of you will say, we do that, we do that, we do that, and I'm sure you do. In sum, these companies are taking a very different approach. The first thing is they drive this dialogue top down. How many of your companies have a chief innovation officer? Okay. How many of you would say that your chief executive officer, your CEO, is actually your chief innovation officer? That's a shame. At every one of those companies, the chief innovation officer is the CEO. So at Facebook, undeniably, it's Mark Zuckerberg. At Amazon, it's Jeff Bezos. At Google, it's Sergey Brin and Larry Page. At Microsoft, it was Gates, then Ballmer, then Nadella. And at Apple, it was Steve Jobs and then Tim Cook. They are the champions of innovation in their companies. How could it be any other way? We've always said that the chief executive officer was the champion of whatever was most important to the company, the brand champion, that they lived and personalized whatever was most important to the company. So if you buy my proposition that we're entering a new world, then the CEO has to be the impersonification of that leadership. Excuse me. That person then obviously, with the help of their board and their executive team, creates a vision or a mission. And I would say the choice of the vision or of the mission needs to be one that forces the entire organization to realize they've got to cross this bridge. So at Google, it is gather the world's information and make it accessible and useful to everyone. What a ridiculous concept. But they said that when they were born, and it forced their people to cross the bridge, because only new disruptive innovations and technologies could ever accomplish that mission. At Facebook, it's just changed, but it is build the social infrastructure that allows every community to capture and interact with itself in ways that are good for everyone in the world. 8 billion people. At Tesla, it is create clean electrical vehicles that transform transportation as quickly as possible. So you set the vision and mission, and all of them do it, that it pushes them to be on the other side, and all their 10,000, 100,000 people have no choice but to hear it, because the vision and mission is the thing the executive team and the board say most frequently to their people. Innovation is then top down on every agenda, and I do mean every agenda. So in most corporate settings, the board of directors will have things on the agenda. And if you actually look at their agendas, your Vorstands, and you look at their agendas, the chances are most meeting, disruptive innovation actually isn't on the agenda. Now, I don't know that for sure, but if you go home and you ask to see the board agendas, if disruptive innovation isn't the number one point on every agenda, you're not like these companies, because in these companies it is. They do other things, not to belabor this point, but for example, at Facebook, there is a weekly all-hands meeting. Not annual, not quarterly, but weekly. And any employee of Facebook anywhere in the world can connect to that call. And the bulk of that call is Mark Zuckerberg explaining the insights he's seen in the prior period, what he's thinking about, and it's always about disruptive innovation, how the world will change, and what Facebook needs to accomplish. It's the entire executive team. In fact, you can't be a senior executive at any of these companies if you're not prepared to live this dialogue. And board directors have been shifted out at some of them, in particular Apple and Microsoft, because they found it difficult to make that transition. What else do I want to say about top-down leadership? It's every day. It's walking around. It's top-down. What's the second thing they do? They embed it into every strategy and plan of the company. So how many of your companies have something called the innovation strategy for your company? So again, 2 or 3 or 4. So all of those companies actually do have one. And in the book, you'll see some of them. But Facebook will say, these are the innovation domains we need to track. These are the future of our company. Alphabet and Google do the same thing. Apple has also got the same list. And all of their people, not just the senior executives, everyone knows Zuck is really excited about blah. They do. And you can go way down. I can go, and I have done this. You go to the Tesla store near my home at Corte Madera, and I ask the employee there, what are the innovation priorities? And they sort of look at you and they say, well, I guess it's A, B, and C. And they're almost right. Right? It's rapid performance through innovation in electrical vehicles. It's embedding solar to drive them. It's all these things. So the challenge on this one is that we have very large companies, and the very large companies have processes. We have the annual board offsite. It drives the briefing document, which all the corporate strategy leader then shares with all the business unit and the functional heads. We then go through a strategic planning cycle and a couple of iterations and a roll-up. We then create budgets that cascade down and back up. We create HR headcount plans that can go back and forward. And at the end of this cycle, we have not only the 5-year, or sometimes even longer, the 3-year strategic plan, we have the budget, we have the HR plan, etc. If you don't begin with innovation at the beginning of that process, you're never going to bake it in at the end. So these companies actually all begin at the beginning with innovation. So they say, these are the things we need to change, these are the technologies we expect to use, and then they expect everyone to follow along. And so at Microsoft, very famously, Bill Gates wrote his memo, I think it was 2000, and it was the internet memo. And that memo was a memo that went out to everyone at Microsoft that said, we will have the internet embedded in everything we do. Every product, every service has got to transition. Every function of Microsoft has got to eat their own dog food. And the people got the message and they started working on it. So corporate strategy, business unit strategy, product strategy, functional strategy, all have to have innovation embedded in them. And they do at Google and Microsoft and so on. Now, I know that this is a very difficult one, but I will share a personal view here, because up there it says competitive advantage. And as a former partner of Michael Porter, and who basically wrote the book on sustainable competitive advantage, as a former partner of Michael Jensen, who wrote the book on economic value and the need to drive the corporation around economic value maximization, and as an ex-McKinsey guy that worked on the valuation book way back when with Kohler and Copeland and Murray, I was an analyst, but I worked on discounted cash flow theory of the valuing the corporation. I am having a crisis of confidence, because I'm not sure that any of those things that we were taught and that we're using in the strategy planning process of our companies is necessarily the right set of tools when you're on the other side of the river. How many people went to business school? Right. So you know what you learned, and I think everything you learned may be wrong. And I do think for this new time, I'm having a crisis of confidence. I'm not sure that economic value is the way to drive a corporation. I think customer-focused innovation is. I'm not sure it makes sense to maximize unique, sustainable, competitive advantage when next day the product definition and the market definition might change. How do you create sustainable competitive advantage in industries that may shift tomorrow where there's a new definition? How do you create competitive strategy when your competitive set is shifting dramatically quickly? I think that we're going to learn more about this. I don't have the answer on this one, but I would say that to cross this river, you must not make your people slaves to the way that you created strategy and plans in the industrial era. The third thing they do is they build an innovation culture. And this is actually, embedded in this is a paradox. In your companies, what percentage of your employees are allowed to innovate? 4% down here. All. So anyone in your company can change a fundamental product feature, a pricing at will. Maybe they can. Maybe your company is different from everyone else's. A.T. Kearney. I worked at A.T. Kearney. I don't think that any partner, any business analyst can change the pricing of a project. I don't think so. But I don't mean to put you on the spot. Just broadly, in most of our companies, less than 10% of the people are actually allowed to innovate in a fundamental way. In regulated industries, banking, healthcare, utilities, almost no one is allowed to actually innovate because we can't afford for them to break regulations, break rules, treat different types of customers differentially. So the paradigm is, how do you create an innovation culture? The paradox. How do you create an innovation culture whilst at the same time not allowing most people to do that? And the good news is there is an answer. And it is what we've already heard in the last couple of days. You use the customer and pride in our products and services as the rallying cry for the broad organization. And you give them the mandate that they can put up their hands and scream loudly if they think customer needs are not being satisfied, customers are not being looked after, competitors have a better product, and the frontline staff are enabled to tell the senior executives of the company, we're not doing a good enough job, we need to change it now. So in the case of a Google or a Facebook, the senior leadership team will go out into the organization and they'll ask every day, have you seen anything? Have you seen anything I should know about? And the people will say, yes, Zook, you need to know. I've heard that. Our competitor is working on this. And they get very paranoid. Only the paranoid survive. They get very paranoid about it, but that's the role, that's the culture you try and create. It's not as difficult as it sounds. You make your broad organization and your frontline staff absolutely extremely excited to do good work on behalf of their customers, to shout loudly when they're not happy, when they don't think you're competitive, and you also make them feel pride in the products and services of the company so that when they see something that isn't right, they let you know. I very much enjoyed once working with Mercedes-Benz. It was 1990. And Mercedes-Benz was very true to its values and beliefs. But then it launched a vehicle, a very famous vehicle, that clearly didn't live up to the beliefs. And I saw Mercedes-Benz change very rapidly when they realized that that vehicle in 1990 just didn't live up to the beliefs and aspirations. That is the type of dynamic that you're working to create. Let me, just before I go to the fourth tier of this, so far, all I've talked about is the role of the executive team. That's all. There's no technology in any of this. There's actually not really any innovation in any of this. This is leadership, strategy, and culture. And the role of the CEO and the management team and the board is to set the vision of the company, drive the leadership, be completely aligned and mobilizing of hundreds of thousands of people. And that is what these 5 companies have really focused on. And the only difference between what they're doing and what everyone else is doing is they have put innovation as the objective function. Not economic value creation, not making the best cars even. They've said we need to be innovative and disruptive, and that is the objective function. The fourth level is exploiting external innovation. And this is somewhat misunderstood because many people think that Apple and Google and Amazon are themselves creating all of their innovations, and the truth is they're not. They're not innovative inside. They're grabbing the world's innovation and pulling it in. And just to do this, I would actually just like to ask you a couple of questions. I think we have the time for this. But the first question is, where will the most important innovations in your industry come from? Just by a show of hands, do you think they'll come from your own company? No one? Well, 2 people. From your industry, as you currently define it, the most important innovations will come from your industry? A few. And then from outside most people. Right? And then if I asked you to sum up all of the innovation spend of your corporation in terms of the dollars and the people and the effort, what would your guess be? Do you think that you're currently spending, 50% of your money externally? 90% of your money externally? No. And then how much of your innovation spend is actually looking beyond your industry into other spaces, other domains of technology and innovation? Anyone think that the majority of their money is beyond their industry? So we have a fundamental opportunity-resource mismatch. And these are the normal statistics. So when we normally do this, we find that no company, I saw 2, but no company believes that they're going to be the disruptive innovator with homegrown technology. And about half the people say it will come from my industry or from without. But when we ask where the spend is, 80% of the spend is internal. So they have a de minimis amount, especially beyond their industry. So it's sort of like, wait a second, it's completely the wrong way up. Well, Google and Apple and Microsoft and Facebook and Amazon were born with the belief that the world is innovative and they needed to grab that innovation, and they do. So if I had more time, I would take you through this in detail, but I'm going to just share a very complicated page, which you can look at later. But essentially, if you look at innovation coming out of labs in research, being developed, creating concepts and bringing them to market and scaling them up, obviously the risk failure rate should be declining over time, of course, but the cost to play begins to rise. Well, it turns out there's a lot of external innovation tools that can be used to secure innovation in each of these phases. So I heard yesterday Deutsche Bank said, we're doing some stuff with MIT, which is either joint R&D agreements or innovation networks. We're doing some stuff with actual Springers, plug and play. We're doing some other things in this side. And then they said, well, we don't actually do any equity investments, which is in the middle. And then we do some acquisitions and partnerships with established companies. Cisco famously used to say, we mostly buy it in at the end. And then when I used to work at Amgen or Genentech, they tend to do an awful lot at this end, working with researchers and labs and universities globally. Google, Apple, Amazon, and so on are doing all of these things and on a scale that is unprecedented. And I'll give you a specific example of Alphabet Google. So Google has relationships with the key technology researchers that they believe are important in every one of the technology domains they're tracking. And they work very hard at that. They have a global network of grants and scholarships and other things. They operate their developer program, which allows anyone in the world that wants to use Google technologies to get support. They have Google Launchpad operating in, I think, 15 countries and expanding rapidly so that all new startups can gain access to Google's support. They have Google Accelerator, where they bring in the best companies and give them 2 weeks of love and then 6 months of support. They have Google Ventures, Google Capital, and so on. And they have a massive acquisition program. And as I said before, most of their big market-facing successes, Android, Google Earth, even actually Overture, which is the Overture ad spend and their ad model, was really in-sourced. So most of their major innovations have come from the outside and been acquired. So this notion of tapping into the world's innovation, making sure you have privileged access to it, securing it when and if you need it, and also denying competitors access to it, which is a whole patent strategy question as well, is the way all of these companies are operating. I'll skip that in the interest of time. So this model is the how. It is the how. The way you're going to cross this bridge from the industrial bank that most of the companies, established companies, are sitting on to get to the other side of this river of innovation is that. You're going to have top-down leadership. You're going to set a new vision and mission which forces you to the other side of the river. You're going to make sure your strategic plans are fully aligned with innovation embedded in them. You're going to do your best to create a culture of innovation which supports innovation in all of its manifestations. And you're going to turn upside down your research model. Just as the big pharmaceutical companies, which were 90% internal, have been closing down and getting rid of tens of thousands of scientists and going to an insourcing model on biotech models and breakthroughs. You're going to have to do that. And the reason you're going to have to do that is there's no monopoly on innovation any longer. The world is innovating, and you have to grab it for your own behalf. And it won't be easy. It's not going to be easy. Getting 10,000 or 100,000 people across this bridge is not easy. And that's sort of, before we go to Q&A, if we have time still for Q&A, I just want to leave this up. I'm in Germany. I thought I'd have a famous Italian. But I believe that he made those points. Thomas Aquinas, if you're the CEO of a company, if you're going to just try and preserve what you've got and stay in port, that's a choice. It's a strategic choice. It's not the right one if you want to benefit from this time of unprecedented innovation. Michael.